Hello there and welcome back to Valdis Story. Today we're going to be doing some backtracking stuff and then some progress stuff. First of all though, let's change up our equipment loadout a little bit. We picked up a shiny new spell soul last time, so it would be a shame if we didn't use it now. So let's equip ourselves up to the gills with fire magic. Well, except for the up spell. We are currently unable to buff our Void Arm. It counts as Vladyn's unarmed weapon, so unless we pick up the Templar bracelets or a similar accessory, we won't be able to buff it with weapon spells. And honestly, it's kind of for the best. That way we get to keep around at least one of our little friends, the Sorcerer. I'm gonna stop calling them by the stupid names I gave them. That was a really dumb bit in the first place, and I should have just thought better about it to begin with. We also switched our armor back to the cleric vestment, since with our current getup, we can actually maintain our demonic alignment while wearing that. And overall, the bonuses it provides are better than that of the murderous raiment. So the first thing that we're going to be getting to today is heading back to the sewers. Now, we won't be seeing too much of our travels through here because for the most part we're just collecting stuff that we couldn't get before, such as good old Bulwark. For the most part I'm not going to be showing this stuff off because I already did so as Vayner, so it's kind of pointless showing it off here. You can just go rewatch that playthrough if you want to see it again. But Bulwark, if I were to skip showing him, I would be a truly terrible person. And that's why I left this in. It also gave me a small chance to show off our fire magic, which at the moment isn't really a pure offensive force in its own right. It's currently still more in the role of support, and that's mainly due to the fact that the spell soul is still at level 1. And we really want our spell souls to be at least level 2 by now, if we want them to be competitive. I considered switching to Bulwark, but honestly, Accent is just a way more useful assist. Even if she doesn't do much damage to the angelic enemies, she's useful for striking them from behind to distract them. But yeah, you can actually get up some decent damage with the fire magic if you end up stacking it, since burning causes the enemy to take more damage from all sources of fire, a useful property. But with the base damage being relatively low, again, it's still not all that amazing just yet. Don't worry though, it will eventually get there. So, skipping ahead a fair bit, we are going to acquire the Angel Key soon. If you recall, it was guarded by Lotso, an angelic gladiator of sorts. And as you may remember, we kind of completely chumped him as Vayner. We just had him stun locked so hard that he never got a chance to do anything, and we didn't even get to see his gimmick. We'll see if that's changed this time or not. First of all, just picking up this item up here, even though I'm pretty sure it's going to be completely pointless for us. It's only used in a specific 1 or 2 items, neither of which we'll be purchasing in this playthrough. But I do want to try and pick up every treasure chest. Gotta try for that completion, even though I'm probably gonna fail it. And given our magic is so weak, let's bring our buddies back for just a second. I'm sure Lotso is tough enough to handle them and Vladyn at the same time. After all, he's an angelic warrior. Yeah, no, we don't have him stun lock quite as hard as we did with Vayner, but he still can't take much from us. Especially when we summon Kudia, seriously. If the enemy you're fighting, even if it's a boss, isn't resistant to fire or void damage, Kudia just wrecks them. A large part of the fun of playing as Vladyn. So while we level up here, since I never actually discussed his gimmick before, he is one of a few enemies with a regenerating shield. The only way to deal damage to his health is to knock down his shields and then attack him. Rather than his shield coming back after a fixed amount of time, it will come back anytime he manages to get away from you for a few seconds. So if you keep piling on the damage, he'll never get a chance. That's why we cheesed him both here and as with Reyna. He just couldn't handle the stun lock. But he can also regenerate his shield by parrying your attacks. After you end up attacking him enough, he'll eventually automatically parry one of your attacks, thus fully restoring his shields, and if he's at low enough HP, sending him into the next phase of his boss fight. The thing is, he can't parry our minions nor our magic. And so, much like with Reyna, we just completely avoided his shield gimmick. All we had to do was take it down once, and then he was just a few steps away from death. So, heading back to Tagram, not for reasons of progression, but to pick up a certain item. I don't believe we ever purveyed Ruth's store as Reyna, perhaps we did. But she sells a limited number of items that are very important for upgrading certain armor sets, as well as crafting other items at merchants. Oh yeah, Zeeg is still a dick, by the way. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Showing off a bit of the progression through the ancient mausoleum here. It's a better example of how potent the fire magic can be, since this area is balanced for level 1 spells. It still pales in comparison to our Voidon because it's level 2. But you get a better idea of how damaging fire magic can potentially be. It's also a great area to show off just how useful an early double jump can be, since it's such a relatively open area with a lot of verticality to it, and crisscrossing pathways. The double jump just comes in handy so much more here than it does in, say, a relatively linear level like the Skyways. It actually makes aerial combat somewhat doable without just immediately dropping down to the lower floor, even if that is what I ended up doing here. It actually makes me kind of feel that perhaps double jump should have been unlocked from the start, but in the current state of the game it's easy enough to obtain that that's basically the case, at least once you know what you're doing. Nothing else of interest in the mausoleum, so let's check out the frozen crypts. Note that Grand Gate location right there. If you're playing as a mage, you want to go for those ASAP. If you've been paying attention, you'll know that we need one of those, and one spell lantern for that matter, for each of these spell upgrades that we do, regardless of whether it's angelic or demonic. As such, knowing their locations if you plan on playing as a mage, or at least focusing on the usage of spell souls, is quite important. And even though we don't really have a use for those grand feral spirits, we might as well pick up the one over here, just to say that we did. I'm pretty sure that it doesn't even count for completion, only treasure chests and bosses do, as well as crew rescued. But random encounters like this that aren't quite proper boss fights, they don't matter at all for that. I could be wrong though, so don't take my word as gospel. And yeah, we wouldn't exactly do well if we tried to use fire magic against it. A shock of that, I'm sure, so we brought our minions back once more. The boys are back in town, and they are quite effective. It helps, of course, that the Void Spell Soul is at level 2, or sorry, the 100 Demon Arm. The Void Arm is the one that we'll pick up from Gurno in a little bit. But yeah, they are effective at killing her. And with this Spell Soul upgraded to level 2, they are pretty beefy. You can actually rely purely on your minions if you end up getting the necessary skills that boost them. Anyway, nothing much of interest else in the frozen crypts, so we're heading towards the library, and making just a quick brief stop back into the abandoned gardens to pick up that one Grand Gate there. And then, before we get to the main business we'll be conducting here, it's time for your favorite, the thing that everybody loves. No, not Raymond. Lore. Like, the lore stuff we learned as Reyna, at the very least, it set up the overall backstory for the game. It's where we learned about the origin of Valdis, and thus, to an extent, Elagath and Morgato as well, you know, the main villains in this world. And it actually does kind of tie into the overall main plot, since our ultimate goal, even though we don't know it for most of the game, is to find the soul of Valdis. But all of this information about the world, even before the Tyrant Gods era when Valdis came about, doesn't really connect in any way to anything, and it's just kind of completely pointless. Oh well, at least it's not a complete waste of time to do, since we do pick up useful stat and skill points. And there we go, the reason why I was investing in the Sentry skill tree is so that now, as Vladyn, we can parry. A very useful tool in our arsenal, as we learned as Vayner. And now it's time to upgrade some spell souls. We could actually max out the 100 Demon Arm and make it level 3, but let's actually give the Soul of the Purifier a chance. We're actually pretty close to being able to upgrade both of them if only we had one more Greater Demon Spirit. Alas, we really don't need level 3 spell souls at this point. Which is why I decide to pick up a level 3 Soul of the Frozen one anyway. You know I love absolutely cheesing the shit out of things in this game. And with a level 3 light spell soul, oh, you bet we'll be doing that against any demons we come across. Let's have a brief chat with Demon. Consider taking up some more training. Ultimately, I elect against it simply because I don't want to use up any of these materials. But looking at the one training that requires an ancient coin actually reminded me the main reason I wanted to come back here to the library. Not upgrading the spell souls, but picking up a certain accessory from good old Honest Avian. The best accessory for any luck-focused build, I will accept no argument to the contrary. It gives us a small luck boost, and makes it so that all of our other core stats are boosted by 1/3 of our luck. The downside is that we constantly take damage. It's relatively small, but it does add up over time, especially if you don't have a significant amount of life leech. The thing is, with these massive amount of core stats that we actually do have a small bit of life leech, even independent of the one skill that gives us life leech. That's one of the main powers of the luck build. With high luck in tandem with the Jester's Watch, you end up having ridiculously high of all of your core stats. And that ends up giving you all of the affinity bonuses, which if you plan your build out well, can just make you even more overpowered than you normally would be. Thinking about it, because of that, we'd actually probably be better off having a neutral affinity. Not for the luck bonus, but for the strength and intelligence bonuses, which would give us extra armor ruin and spell ruin, and thus make our damage output overall greater. But having that boosted affliction chance from luck is also quite useful. Without it, we wouldn't be applying burning at all, and our fire magic would be even less useful than it currently is. But yeah, as you can see, the fire magic damage is now pretty competitive. And that's important because some of the enemies we'll be facing, such as these turtling dudes, can't really be harmed by regular melee attacks. When they put their guards up, you're not breaking through that unless you have a spell. And I spend the next few minutes trying to get that fisherman encounter so I can pick up that other Archville spear, because I figured, why not? But I just don't have the luck, despite having like 19 points of it. It makes me wonder if perhaps that encounter only occurs after a certain plot trigger, like maybe talking to Sezi, which you may have noticed we kind of avoided doing. You can actually avoid talking to him for a while and do most of the content in the game. Actually, every bit of content that's not locked behind a divine door, funnily enough. But yeah, either it's just not available until later, or I just had the worst luck, because despite being at this for like 15 minutes, it never worked out. I fought these guys so many times, I picked up so many materials, even some high tier stuff, and even got a whopping 2 level ups out of it. Even though I like being overpowered, I still don't like grinding in a game like this. It's just not something I enjoy doing, but eh. Yeah, look at that. 21 Greater Fill Spirits. It's kind of ridiculous. And hey, now we can pick up Overlord, which increases our minion's skill level. And we'll see exactly what that does right here. Oh, gotta apply that one more point of luck. Oh yeah, look at our little budding sorcerer. He has evolved into a Dracula, that triple fireball pattern. And each projectile has its own chance of spawning as one of the 3 elements that it has available. So you can end up with 3 projectiles that do the same element, 3 that do different, or any combination in between. It just makes them a lot more useful. Sadly, the upgrades to the other 2 minions aren't quite nearly as stark. They're stronger, but it's not nearly as noticeable as that triple fireball upgrade to his regular single projectile shot. But yeah, he is now so much more effective at applying damage. And if he fires off a triple fireball of fire elemental spells, well, that just helps us apply burning even more so. It's called skill synergy, and it's a part of this game that I absolutely love. So cutting out most of the sunken prison, since again we've seen it before. We're right here at the end, right before the village that was in the execution hall. But something you may notice here as we approach it. Eventually, fighting this bunny boy. Now come on, me of the past. Don't force me to stall for time even further. Right there. The god that was previously guarding the village is gone. And there seem to be a lot of skeletons littering the outside. Oh, and the inside. So, if you don't take down the Yeti in its first appearance, and you have up until you arrive at Ishq for that, as I've stated before, he moves on to the execution hall here, and promptly slaughters everyone inside, thus robbing you of their services. So, if you want any of the things that they offer, make sure you take down the Yeti post-haste. Fortunately, we don't really need any of that stuff as Vladyn. Now, as for the fight itself, the Yeti isn't any stronger than in his first encounter, which can make it appear like an easy fight at first. But another reason why I always like taking down the Yeti as soon as possible is because this encounter is so much more dangerous once you get down his health a little. Not only do you not have those platforms to more easily navigate your way across him, and thus strike him from behind when he does that projectile spam, but he also summons a number of fellow sirens that just fill the screen with all sorts of projectiles. And if you're stuck trying to button mash your way out of being frozen while the Yeti's doing attacks, well, you're not exactly going to be in the best situation. Even though we did end up with an overall S rank and an S in each of the 3 categories, we actually came pretty close to dying. And so even though the Yeti himself isn't any stronger and is comparatively weaker because you are stronger, it is overall a much more difficult fight if you wait until now. Trying to figure out exactly where I want to put this last skill point. Whether I want to save it for when we get to level 15 and unlock that final tier in the 100 Demon Arm, or start working our way further into Sentry. I ultimately decide on Sentry because of one skill in particular that is super useful for my purposes. But yeah, if you haven't noticed, one thing I'd like to point out here, aside from the spike boxes that apparently the Yeti set up because they weren't there when this place was thriving, the music that's playing in the background is actually a unique track that doesn't really show up too much else in the game. In fact, I think there's only 2 other instances of it appearing. If you can guess why it shows up, you may know what those instances are, if you've been paying attention. If not, don't worry, you'll see them soon enough. Anyway, on our way out, one more encounter with these boys brings us just far enough to reach level 15, giving us one more point of luck, that smooth 20, and letting us pick up the Refract skill. That's the one I was talking about. It gives us a chance, based on our luck, to absorb 50% of any magic damage that we're struck by. Considering that magic damage generally comes in the form of projectiles, and it tends to be projectiles that litter the screen in the more difficult combat encounters, I'm sure you can see why that's useful. Oh, and I kind of skipped over this, but yeah, we picked up the Abandoned Doll, and we're going to fight the Raven. Hey, if we fought the Yeti, we might as well fight its upgraded counterpart. Despite it being purely stronger than the Yeti, because it lacks those feral summons and has an overall easier arena to work with, at least in my opinion, it actually ends up being the easier of the two fights. It doesn't help that because he's poison as opposed to ice elemental, we can freeze him, and thus pretty easily cheese him. One of the nice things about the freezing affliction is that it only wears off after a small amount of time, or you strike the enemy that's frozen with a physical attack. So if you have a high enough affliction chance and you just keep spamming freeze magic and they're vulnerable to it, you can potentially keep them stun locked. Sadly, we didn't have the affliction chance high enough to do that here, but it didn't matter much in the end anyway, considering the insane amount of damage we do with Kudir. Seriously, I think we took off like half of his health bar in a few seconds. It's kind of insane. Now, we could progress further into the Sentry skill tree here, and there are some good bonuses, but we should pick up this capstone here in particular. More attack damage for every small demon soul that we have in our inventory. Since we have a lot of them, it's pretty useful. It's not a huge boost, but it certainly does help. First of all, let's check in back with the magic trainers. See if we can pick up any upgrades. Unfortunately, nope. Not only do we still not have that other greater demon spirit, but we also don't have the spell lantern and Grandigate necessary to do any upgrades of any sort. That's why I emphasized why knowing their locations is important. Every single one is necessary for a magic focused character. So, in lieu of upgrading our spells, let's upgrade our weapon options instead, and start checking those out since all we've used up to this point were the shotgun and pistol pair, and the void arm. So the Doombringer is a pistol and rocket launcher pair. Bet you weren't expecting that. While the Esperander's long gun is a pistol and sniper rifle pair. Yeah, all of Vladyn's alternate gun weapons have the pistol as the light attack. The only thing that ends up changing is what is the heavy attack, the heftier gun. We'll check out both of these new weapons in due time. But the first one we'll be using is the Esperander's long gun. Not only because it's overall the better of the two, but because it will be particularly useful in the upcoming area. Of course, to be useful we'll need to upgrade it, and for that we need a few more greater angel spirits. Thankfully we can make use of Daborsk, who's just a few rooms away, to compact some lesser souls into those greater ones. That is one of the nice things about this crafting system that shows that even if it wasn't perhaps the best idea, the developers did carefully consider it, given that oftentimes to get the materials for other trades, you'll be able to do so from other vendors in the nearby vicinity. Sadly, we don't have enough to upgrade it to level 3, but as we'll be seeing, that's not quite necessary. But since we can, we might as well bring the Doombringer up. It's not costing anything especially valuable. We'll find out exactly what the Doombringer does later. For now, as I said, we'll be using the long gun. After I equip it. Eventually. This is the trouble of giving commentary a few days after you record. You kind of forget exactly what you did. So, this weapon is rather interesting. It's light aligned. It gives you a boost to critical damage, which I would say isn't too useful, but we actually have a very high critical chance now, thanks to the Jester's Watch. So that actually is somewhat helpful. That's part of why I decided to switch back to the Murderer's Raiment. The other reason is that we need that in order to maintain our dark aligned nature, since we're going to be using ice light aligned spells. The other property that the gun just gives you passively, you have it even if you're not necessarily using the gun to attack, is a pretty big boost to spell ruin. Plus 10 may not seem like much, but considering we don't have a whole lot to begin with, it helps. And it's what makes the long gun an especially useful weapon for magic focused characters. As for the weapon itself, well, it is a sniper rifle. Its reach is limited only by the width of the screen, and sometimes not even by that. It'll extend even beyond what you can see to hit enemies, which makes it really nice for just cheesing them afar. It's also great because it pierces through every enemy that it strikes, so you can end up hitting a lot of enemies if they're lined up in a row. And unlike some other weapons, it's effective against everything because it does hybrid damage. Part of its damage is ice, and thus it has the ability to freeze enemies, but most of the damage is physical, and thus even against ice elemental enemies like that siren there, it's actually still really effective. Now, one thing to know about using it, and really this is true of all of Vladyn's guns, is that it has a significantly long cooldown time after you perform the heavy attack. After all, you have to reload your rifle. It's one shot, one kill. However, you can cancel this animation not just with a skill cancel, but by jumping as well. So if you just repeatedly jump in heavy attack, you can attack with much greater frequency than you could if you just tried to stay still on the ground. If you've played Castlevania Aria of Sol, you're probably familiar with this jump cancelling technique. But yeah, if you're using his guns, that's how you want to use them for the most part. Maybe not jump all the time, especially if you have the possibility of falling down and losing your footing. But generally speaking, jump and heavy attack, that's how you use these things. And even though each of the guns is functionally identical in that way, they still end up feeling fairly distinct, simply because each weapon has its own use. The shotgun has arguably the highest damage output, but it's only useful at short range. The long gun has insane reach and can strike multiple enemies, but only if they're lined up in a row. And as for the Doombringer, well, we'll see that next time when we actually get around to using it. No need to rush ahead and spoil the fun. Also, one great thing about the long gun in particular is that you can kill enemies that you're not necessarily supposed to. Fortunately, the game is well enough designed, or at least simply enough designed, that that never causes any issues. Killing that one enemy that Ben McSteely up there is fighting doesn't actually affect anything, fortunately. And fighting that one demon sorcerer there is a good example of the cheese potential of this thing. As Vayna, it was basically one long game of cat and mouse, but as Vladyn with the long gun who can strike him from pretty much anywhere without having to move around, it was a breeze. It also made the entirety of the abandoned mines a cakewalk. So much so that we're already at the end, and I didn't even cut out all that much. I wanted to show off exactly how good the long gun can be. And as the final checkmark for that task, let's see how this refight with Azador goes. Comparing it to our previous experience as Vayna, ignore the second two phases since, as I mentioned before, they're not a thing. Compare it solely to the first phase attempt we had as Vayna. Of course, before that we have to go through a bit more dialogue. Some of it's good, some of the character-specific dialogue and some of the conversations is pretty amusing. Vladyn's failed attempts at flirting are always quite amusing. But then you have conversations like this which are just kind of eh. This is a lot more entertaining, by the way, if you happen to be playing as Gilda, because one of the little lore details is that Azador here is her younger brother, and she gives him a lot of sass anytime she meets him. But if you want to see that, you'll have to pick up this game and play through as Gilda on your own, or look through a Gilda playthrough on YouTube. Anyway, yeah, in that brief 10 seconds or so since we started the fight, Azador is already half dead. Between our Ice Elemental Long Gun and our Lightning Elemental Assist Axon, and our minion who is still doing pretty good damage despite having all Dark Line spells, Azador can't really do shit. He tries to summon minions to help, but considering we can take them down while also dealing significant damage to him, he just doesn't really stand a chance. And of course we can use our somewhat homing pistol shots to knock him from his perch above anytime he tries to do that, and thus kind of just completely shut him down. I try and end the fight in a cool way, but I just kind of fail to do so, and then I just kill him. Can't always end things in a cool fashion. I was trying to go for the parry, I think, but my timing was awful. My timing was ass, you could say. So yeah, if you end up killing Distan early and having just this sole rematch with Azador, you end up picking up an additional Archdemon Spirit instead of that Twisted Spirit, as I've mentioned before. For magic characters, this is arguably better. You're probably not going to make too much use of the armor of the Grey Knight since it is an additional MP drain, which you kind of want to avoid if you're using a lot of magic for offense. And being able to upgrade an additional demon spell can be quite useful. It's not the end of the world if you fail to do this, but it's how I prefer to play when playing as a magic-focused character. Anyway, of course, as what happened last time, that was a load-bearing treasure chest. It was the entire foundation of this place, and having opened it, it naturally starts collapsing. And of course that means we have to make our quick exit. Oh yeah, speaking of things glitching out, killing that demon there kind of messes up this first dialogue prompt. When I first encountered this, I was hoping it would result in even more glitchiness, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. I was really hoping to break the game, but overall, for what it's worth, this game is pretty damn stable, at least in its current state. In none of the playthroughs I've done have I run into any sort of game-breaking bugs or anything like that. So props to Endless Fluff for doing that. Not all developers are capable of that even after updating their game a bunch of times. Bethesda. Sorry, random coughing fit there. Anyway, we're just about out of the mine. I think we made it in even better time than we did as Vayner. Oh, the long gun is so good. But in the time we've been away, it seems that Ishq is finally succumbing to their broken mana heater. This poor schoolchild here is cold. Will we be able to restore the mana heater? Will we be able to bring warmth to the children of this poor, beleaguered village? Well, no, because I want to show off what happens when you don't.